A judge decided to fine a royal guard for breaking the rules, thinking he could easily make an example of him. But when the guard revealed his sharp legal mind, the judge realized he'd picked a fight with the wrong person. Here's how it unfolded. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And please subscribe to the channel if you respect the royal guards. The summer sun blazed down on the paved area outside Buckingham Palace, drawing long shadows across the courtyard. Lieutenant Ivor Blackstone stood there, perfectly still. His bright red tunic looked flawless even in the baking heat, his posture showing 8 years of army discipline. Behind the ceremonial bearskin hat and under the perfect uniform wasn't just a soldier, but a man whose journey to the Queen's Guard was unusual. Blackstone's eyes stayed fixed straight ahead, his face unreadable as tourists gathered to take pictures. The morning crowd was pretty standard. Families with excited kids, couples taking selfies, and the odd visitor trying to get a reaction by pushing the boundaries. Blackstone had seen it all before. He'd stood through scorching summers and freezing winters with the same quiet dedication that had won him awards in Afghanistan before he got this post. The trouble started quietly. A soft gasp, then worried whispers from the crowd. Out of the corner of his eye, Blackstone noticed movement where there shouldn't have been any. An elderly woman, maybe in her 70s, grabbed at her chest and started to fall towards the ground, her face pale. The rules were clear. Stay at attention unless the palace itself was under threat. Guards had stood stock still through storms, medical emergencies, and even tourists fainting. But Blackstone had also taken an oath to protect people. In the split second before the woman hit the ground, he made his choice. With swift military precision, Blackstone stepped forward and caught the woman just before she collapsed completely. "Ma'am, are you all right?" His voice, which he hadn't used for hours on duty, was steady and calm. The woman's pulse felt weak under his gloved fingers as he gently helped her sit down. "Someone call for medical help," he ordered, his tone carrying the authority learned on the battlefield. Several tourists got their phones out and dialed emergency numbers, while Blackstone stayed, supporting the elderly woman. Her breathing was difficult, her skin damp. "I have heart medicine," she whispered, weakly pointing to her handbag. Blackstone found the small pill bottle and helped her take the medicine, making sure her airway was clear. "Stand aside! What's going on here?" A sharp voice cut through the worried murmurs. A tall man in a perfectly tailored suit pushed forward, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking impatiently on the stones. Why has this guard left his post? Lawrence Montgomery didn't wait for an answer. He looked over the scene, his cold grey eyes assessing the situation like a prosecutor. The gold cufflinks on his wrists glinted in the sun as he waved dismissively. His signet ring, showing the crest of the Royal Courts of Justice, made his job obvious to anyone who recognized such symbols of legal power. "Sir, there's a medical emergency," a young woman from the crowd explained. "The guard is helping." "I can see what he's doing," Montgomery interrupted, checking his fancy Patek Philippe watch with clear annoyance. "What I don't see is any reason for abandoning ceremonial duties." Paramedics arrived quickly, their efficient movements a blur as they took over caring for the elderly woman. "Suspected heart problem," Blackstone told them quietly, his assessment showing medical training most tourists wouldn't guess he had. "She took 1 dose of nitroglycerin about 3 minutes ago." The paramedics nodded, appreciating the detailed information. As they moved the woman onto a stretcher, she grabbed Blackstone's hand. "Thank you, young man. I don't know what would have happened if—" "That's enough," Montgomery cut in. "The emergency services are here now. I believe you have a post to get back to, guard." Blackstone straightened up, his face becoming expressionless again like it should be for the ceremony. With perfect precision, he turned and marched back to his spot, standing exactly as he should, perfectly embodying his service. To anyone watching, he looked every bit the dutiful guard again. There was no hint of the Oxford law degree he earned before his army career, or the excellent way he'd served in both jobs. Montgomery straightened his tie, a cold smile spreading across his face as he watched Blackstone return to his position. The judge's fingers tapped against his leather briefcase. His mind was already planning how he would deal with this guard who had dared to break the rules, even for a good reason. As the paramedics wheeled the elderly woman towards the ambulance, Montgomery stood with his arms crossed, watching Blackstone take up his post with military exactness. The guard's face was back to its ceremonial blankness. Eyes forward, posture perfect, as if the brief interruption hadn't happened. "You there, guard?" Montgomery called out, his voice loud and practiced from commanding courtrooms. "I need a word with you about what just occurred." He walked towards Blackstone with measured steps, stopping right in his line of sight, where the guard would have to either look at him or through him, following protocol. The crowd started to thin out as the medical excitement died down, but a few people stayed, sensing a new kind of tension. Among them, 2 men in their 60s wearing Royal Marines veteran badges exchanged worried looks, their faces showing unease at Montgomery's approach. "I am Judge Lawrence Montgomery of the Crown Court," he announced loudly, making sure everyone nearby could hear. "And what I've just witnessed is a clear failure in your duty." He leaned closer, his expensive aftershave strong, and creating an invisible wall between him and the ordinary tourists. "Your only responsibility is to stay at your post, isn't it? Not to play doctor." Blackstone remained completely still, his eyes fixed forward as the rules required. Only the slight tightening of his jaw, invisible to most, might have hinted at his thoughts to those who knew him well. "Nothing to say for yourself?" Montgomery pushed, his thin lips curling into a smirk. "Perhaps you don't know that breaking Royal Guard protocol comes with serious consequences. Section 12 of the Military Conduct Code makes that perfectly clear." One of the veterans shifted uncomfortably. There was no such section in any rule book for the Queen's Guard, but Montgomery spoke with the confidence of someone used to having his legal statements accepted without question. "I could fine you a month's wages right here," Montgomery continued, his voice dropping to a quieter, more menacing tone. "I have the power. Or maybe you'd prefer formal charges. Leaving your post can mean up to 6 months in detention, especially if palace security might have been affected." A woman nearby gasped softly at the harsh threat, which only seemed to spur Montgomery on. He straightened his already perfect tie, a habit he seemed to have when building up to a point. "Your silence just proves you're guilty," he declared, starting to pace in front of Blackstone like a lawyer addressing a jury. "Do you have any idea how many tourists saw you break sacred protocol? How many foreign visitors will go home thinking Britain's famous discipline is just an act?" The crowd had started to grow again, drawn by Montgomery's increasingly dramatic performance. Several people had pulled their children closer, uncomfortable with the public telling off of a soldier in uniform. "Sir?" A middle-aged woman tried to interrupt. He was helping someone who was unwell. "Madam, I am a Crown Court judge." Montgomery cut her off without even looking at her. "I believe I understand the law rather better than you do." His focus stayed entirely on Blackstone, who kept his forward gaze with practiced discipline. This isn't about helping someone. This is about respecting centuries of tradition and rules. The 2 veterans had moved closer now, their posture hinting at military backgrounds even years after leaving the service. The taller one shook his head slightly as Montgomery carried on his rant. "The fine will be substantial," Montgomery declared, pulling a small notebook from his breast pocket as if preparing to write a real ticket. "I'm thinking £500 would be suitable, though the court might demand more once I file my report." He made a show of checking his watch again. "Of course, if you'd care to explain yourself now, I might be persuaded to be lenient." Blackstone's continued silence seemed to make Montgomery even angrier. The judge's face flushed slightly as he took another step closer, crossing the invisible line that tourists usually respected. "Perhaps you don't fully understand how serious this is." Montgomery's voice hardened. "I've seen men like you before, thinking the uniform gives them some special protection from the law. Let me assure you, it does not. By this time tomorrow, you could be facing disciplinary action that ends your career. Is that what you want? Guard?" Still, Blackstone remained motionless, the perfect picture of Royal Guard discipline. But behind his blank expression, years of legal training were already analyzing every false rule and empty threat Montgomery had made. The summer heat grew stronger as noon approached, but it felt like Montgomery's rising anger was making the area around Buckingham Palace even hotter. His perfectly manicured finger jabbed the air inches from Blackstone's chest as he continued his lecture. Statute 23 of the Royal Protection Act clearly states that leaving one's post, even for a moment, is a breach of national security protocol, Montgomery declared, his voice rising with each made-up legal reference, which carries a minimum penalty of— "Excuse me, sir," a soft voice interrupted. A young woman holding a guidebook had stepped forward. "I think the guard did the right thing. That lady might have died without help." Montgomery turned, giving her a stare that had silenced many courtrooms. "The right thing. Let me teach you what the right thing actually means in legal terms." His tone oozed condescension. "Royal Guards serve the Crown under rules that go back centuries. Those rules don't include playing doctor." The woman stepped back, put off by his authoritative tone, but the interruption had only made Montgomery angrier. He turned back to Blackstone with renewed force. Section 47, Paragraph 3 of Military Discipline Protocols requires immediate suspension for any ceremonial guard who leaves their post without direct orders from a superior officer. He continued, the fake rules flowing easily. "I don't suppose you had orders like that when you decided to play the hero." Blackstone kept his perfect forward gaze, standing so still he could have been made of stone. The beads of sweat on his temples were the only sign he was a real person, not just a ceremonial statue. Behind his disciplined appearance, though, his mind was recording every false statute and made-up regulation Montgomery spouted. The two veterans had moved closer now, their weathered faces set in grim lines. The shorter one, whose chest displayed service medals from wars fought decades ago, whispered something to his friend. Both men watched Montgomery carefully, like soldiers assessing a threat. "Your continuing silence only makes things worse," Montgomery announced loudly so everyone nearby could hear. "Failing to respond to a Crown Court judge conducting an official inquiry adds obstruction of justice to your growing list of offenses." He pretended to write this in his notebook, though his pen never touched the paper. A young father pulled his son away from the gathering crowd, murmuring, "Come on, let's go." Clearly uncomfortable with the scene. Several tourists had started filming discreetly on their phones, their faces showing unease with Montgomery's increasingly aggressive behavior. "Perhaps you don't fully grasp the seriousness of your situation," Montgomery continued, moving even closer to Blackstone. "I am empowered by the Court Justice Act to issue immediate judgments for contempt. £5,000 and 30 days. He threatened, naming a penalty far beyond anything reasonable for the supposed offence. The taller veteran took a half step forward, but was stopped by his friend's hand on his arm. "Not yet," the shorter man whispered. "Wait." Montgomery's face had flushed a dangerous shade of red. His frustration at Blackstone's continued silence was building towards something explosive. "I've sentenced men for far less than what you've done today," he hissed, lowering his voice to an intimate threat. "One phone call from me, and your military career is over this afternoon." Blackstone's expression stayed blank, but something changed in his eyes. a subtle sharpening of focus that might have warned a more observant man he was on thin ice. The Parliamentary Protection of Ceremonial Guards Act of 1998 specifically forbids any deviation from prescribed protocols, Montgomery continued, inventing laws with increasing recklessness. Violations are punishable by immediate dishonorable discharge and loss of pension benefits. An elderly woman in the crowd tutted loudly, clearly disapproving not of Blackstone, but of Montgomery's display. Disgraceful, she murmured audibly, harassing the poor man for helping someone. Montgomery spun towards her, nostrils flaring. "Madam, I suggest you keep your uninformed opinions to yourself, or you may find yourself charged with interfering in a judicial proceeding." The threat was as empty as his invented laws, but delivered with enough authority to make the woman step back. When he turned back to Blackstone, Montgomery's composure had cracked even more. He pulled out his phone, pretending to dial. "Perhaps you'll take this more seriously when I have your commanding officer on the line," he said. "Or better yet, the Minister of Defense. I had dinner with him just last week, you know." The phone call was clearly fake. Montgomery wasn't actually talking to anyone as he continued his act. "Yes, Minister, I'm at Buckingham Palace, where I've witnessed a shocking breach of protocol. A guard left his post to get involved in a civilian matter." He paused for an imaginary reply. "Yes, quite serious indeed. I have cited him under sections 12, 47, and the Parliamentary Act of 98. The veterans exchanged knowing glances. No such call was happening. No such laws existed. Montgomery was exposing himself with every made-up word. The pretend phone call ended with Montgomery making a show of hanging up, his face showing grim satisfaction. "Well, that settles it," he announced, putting his phone away dramatically. "The minister agrees completely. Immediate suspension, pending formal charges." By now, a circle had formed around Blackstone and Montgomery. Onlookers were drawn by the spectacle, despite feeling uncomfortable. The confrontation felt like street theatre, with Montgomery playing to the crowd, even while focusing his anger on the impassive guard. "I'm giving you one final chance to admit your misconduct," Montgomery declared, his voice carrying the practiced projection of courtroom statements. "Admit you broke protocol, apologize for your actions, and perhaps I can be persuaded to reduce the penalties to something less career-ending." Blackstone remained perfectly still, his forward gaze unwavering. The only sign of tension might have been a slight whitening of his knuckles on the ceremonial rifle, invisible to casual onlookers, but noticed by the veterans watching nearby. "Nothing to say?" Montgomery's voice dropped dangerously. "Very well. We'll do this the hard way." He stepped even closer, taking a business card from his wallet and holding it right in Blackstone's line of sight. "My chambers expect your formal response by noon tomorrow. Failure to appear will result in a warrant for your arrest." A murmur went through the crowd at this escalation. One of the veterans shook his head in disgust, whispering to his friend, "This has gone too far." Montgomery seemed to thrive on the audience's reaction, his performance becoming grander. "Perhaps you think your uniform protects you from legal consequences," he continued, circling Blackstone like a prosecutor closing in. "Many have made that mistake in my courtroom. None have made it twice." The tension in the air was almost thick enough to touch, the summer heat making everyone's discomfort worse. Several tourists had started to drift away, parents guiding children from the increasingly unpleasant scene. Others stayed put, unsure if they should intervene, but equally uncomfortable just watching silently. "I wonder," Montgomery mused, his voice dripping with false concern, "what your family will think when they learn their son threw away his military career for a momentary lapse in judgment. Such a waste." The mockery in his tone was obvious now. Any pretense of judicial fairness was long gone. The taller veteran took a firm step forward, but his friend held him back again. "Not our fight yet," the shorter man cautioned, though his own face had hardened like stone. Montgomery checked his watch again. a routine gesture that seemed meant to remind everyone how valuable his time was. "I have a court session in 2 hours. Important matters. Unlike this waste of my morning." He straightened his already perfect suit jacket. "I expect this matter to be finished before I reach my chambers." Blackstone's continued silence seemed to push Montgomery over the edge. His face twisted with a flash of raw anger, quickly hidden behind his judicial mask, but revealing all the same. "You are hereby officially cited for violations of sections 12, 23, and 47 of the Royal Protection Statutes," he announced, his voice rising so everyone could hear. "As a Crown Court judge, I am using my authority to issue an immediate fine of £10,000 and to recommend dishonourable discharge from Her Majesty's service." The ridiculousness of the statement, citing non-existent laws and claiming powers no judge had, might have been funny in another situation. Here, with Montgomery's finger now jabbing towards Blackstone's chest, it had crossed into something darker. "Consider yourself formally charged," Montgomery concluded, his finger moving the final inch to touch Blackstone's red tunic, right above the regimental badge. The physical contact, that single pointed poke of his manicured finger, was done with the certainty of a man used to getting away with things. That single touch hung in the air like a crack of thunder before a storm. The veterans straightened up together, their bodies shifting into military readiness. Several onlookers gasped softly. And Blackstone, whose perfect stillness had seemed unbreakable, moved his eyes for the first time, looking directly into Montgomery's with the focus of a sniper. The moment stretched, tight with possibility. Montgomery's finger stayed pressed against the red uniform, his face fixed in triumphant certainty. He had no idea he had just made the one mistake that would destroy his illusion of power. "Sir, I must respectfully ask you to remove your hand from my uniform." Blackstone's voice sliced through the tense silence, like a sharp knife, calm, measured, and carrying absolute authority. The change was instant and shocking. Where moments before stood a ceremonial figure, now stood a man radiating controlled power. Montgomery blinked, momentarily thrown by the sudden shift. His finger stayed where it was, pressed against the red tunic, as his brain caught up. "So, you've decided to speak after all," he recovered, trying to regain control. "Too late for that, I'm afraid. The charges have been filed." "No, sir, they have not," Blackstone replied, his tone filled with the quiet confidence of someone on familiar territory. He took a precise step back, forcing Montgomery's finger off his uniform with the movement. "There are no sections 12, 23, or 47 in any Royal Protection Statute. No Parliamentary Protection of Ceremonial Guards Act exists, and you have neither the authority to issue fines nor recommend military discharges." The crowd gasped collectively. Montgomery's face froze in stunned surprise before quickly twisting into judicial anger. "How dare you question my authority?" "I'm not questioning your judicial authority, sir," Blackstone interrupted with calm precision. "I'm stating, as a matter of legal fact, that you are attempting to use powers you don't have, citing laws that don't exist, and making threats you can't carry out." Montgomery's mouth opened and closed silently for a moment. Blackstone continued before he could recover. "Before joining the Queen's Guard, I completed my law degree at Oxford with first-class honours, specialising in constitutional and military law. I am extremely familiar with the actual regulations governing my position." Blackstone's posture remained perfect, his delivery measured and exact. "Royal Guard Protocol Section 5, Paragraph 3 specifically allows ceremonial guards to break formation in cases of immediate threat to public safety or health. The medical emergency I responded to fits perfectly within those rules." Montgomery's face had gone pale, the confident flush from moments ago replaced by a sickly white. "You cannot possibly expect me to believe." "Furthermore," Blackstone continued, his voice never rising yet somehow holding everyone's complete attention, The physical contact you just initiated constitutes battery against a serving member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces. Under the Military Personnel Protection Act, a statute that actually exists, this is punishable by up to 2 years' imprisonment. The veterans had moved forward now, flanking Blackstone at a respectful distance. The shorter one nodded almost invisibly, clear approval on his weathered face. Your claim to have spoken with the Minister of Defence is particularly worrying. Blackstone continued, his legal training obvious in the methodical way he dismantled Montgomery's position. Making false claims of government authority constitutes misconduct in public office, a common law offence carrying a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. The fact that you did so while identifying yourself as a Crown Court judge makes it significantly more serious. Montgomery had started to back away, his earlier arrogance vanishing with each precise legal point Blackstone made. This is absurd. I was merely... Additionally, Blackstone pressed on, your attempt to issue fake citations while presenting yourself as acting in your judicial role is a clear breach of judicial conduct regulations, specifically Principle 3 regarding integrity, propriety, and impartiality. The crowd had gone completely silent, hanging on every word of Blackstone's response. Even the children seemed to sense the seriousness of what was happening. I am familiar with your record on the bench, Judge Montgomery, Blackstone continued, his tone changing subtly. Your handling of the Westfield case last year raised serious questions about judicial temperament, questions that were ultimately dismissed due to lack of evidence. This incident, however, has been witnessed by dozens of civilians, 2 retired military officers, and is almost certainly recorded on palace security cameras. Montgomery's face had gone from pale to grey. You can't possibly. I can and I must, Blackstone replied evenly. As a serving member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces and a qualified legal professional, I have a duty to report attempted misconduct in public office. Your fabricated statutes, non-existent phone call to the minister, and attempt to use authority you don't possess will all be detailed in that report. The taller veteran stepped forward. Lieutenant Colonel James Whitmore, retired. He introduced himself, his bearing clearly military despite years out of uniform. I served 30 years, including 5 as a military judge. I'll be happy to provide my own witness statement about this incident. His companion nodded. Major Richard Hargrove, 28 years' service. I believe I caught most of your invented statutes on my phone recording, Judge Montgomery. Remarkable performance. Montgomery's composure had completely shattered now. His earlier commanding manner was replaced by stunned disbelief. There's been a misunderstanding, he stammered, adjusting his tie with fingers that trembled slightly. I was merely attempting to ensure proper protocol was... I understand completely, sir, Blackstone replied, his tone professionally neutral. Misrepresenting the law can indeed lead to serious misunderstandings. Fortunately, the actual statutes are quite clear on both my actions during the medical emergency and your conduct afterwards. With military precision, Blackstone returned to his ceremonial stance, eyes forward, posture perfect, but not before adding his final point. Your contact with my uniform constituted battery. Your misrepresentation of judicial authority constituted misconduct in public office. Both are serious offences. I suggest you consult with legal counsel at your earliest convenience. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant sounds of London traffic and Montgomery's ragged breathing as he faced the wreckage of his authority. Montgomery stood frozen, the colour drained from his face, as the full weight of Blackstone's words hit him. His hand moved automatically to straighten his tie, a nervous habit now, not a sign of power. The crowd stayed silent, watching the stunning turn of events with bated breath. There seems to have been a misunderstanding, Montgomery finally managed, his voice weak, stripped of its earlier command. I was merely concerned about proper protocol and making up legal statutes while presenting yourself as acting in an official capacity isn't a misunderstanding, Judge Montgomery. Lieutenant Colonel Whitmore cut in, his voice carrying the authority of his decades in military justice. It's misconduct in public office. Montgomery took a step back, bumping into a tourist who quickly moved away. I never claimed to be acting in an official capacity, he protested weakly. I was simply offering my professional opinion on a matter of public interest. While citing non-existent laws, claiming to call a government minister, and physically touching a guard's uniform after identifying yourself as a Crown Court judge? Major Hargrove added, his phone still recording. Interesting way of not acting in an official capacity, wouldn't you say, James? Whitmore nodded gravely. Most interesting. I wonder if the Judicial Conduct Investigations Office would see it that way. Montgomery's eyes darted between the retired officers, Blackstone, who had returned to his perfect ceremonial stance, and the silent crowd of witnesses. The carefully built image of judicial authority had completely crumbled, leaving only a man desperately trying to escape a situation spiraling out of his control. This entire situation has been blown out of proportion. Montgomery tried again, his voice higher pitched than before. I was merely expressing concern about ceremonial standards. There was no intent to be— Your intent was quite clear from your statements, sir. Blackstone interrupted, his eyes once again fixed forward in proper ceremonial position, though he continued to speak. You explicitly claimed judicial authority to issue fines and recommend military discharge. You physically touched a guard's uniform after repeated escalation. Your intent is a matter of record, witnessed by dozens and captured on multiple recording devices. A woman stepped forward from the crowd, her face determined. I have the entire incident on video, she confirmed, including all the made-up laws and the fake phone call to the minister. Montgomery's shoulders slumped visibly. The realization seemed to hit him that there would be no easy way out of the consequences. I may have overstepped, he conceded, each word seeming forced out. A momentary lapse in judgment. Surely we can resolve this without further escalation? Lieutenant Colonel Whitmore exchanged glances with Major Hargrove before replying. That would depend on Lieutenant Blackstone. As the serving officer directly affected by your conduct, the decision to file formal charges would primarily be his. All eyes turned to Blackstone, who remained perfectly still in his ceremonial stance, his expression unreadable. The crowd waited, tension hanging heavy in the summer air. Lieutenant Blackstone acted with distinction during a medical emergency, potentially saving a life while following the actual protocols for his position, Whitmore continued. Your attempt to intimidate and threaten him afterwards was disgraceful. Montgomery swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing noticeably above his expensive tie. I realize now that I was misinformed about certain protocols. He managed, the words clearly painful. My behavior was inappropriate. I apologize unreservedly. The apology hung in the air. Its sincerity was doubtful, but its necessity was clear. After a moment that felt like forever, Blackstone spoke one last time, without ever breaking his forward gaze. Your apology is noted, sir. I would strongly advise reviewing both the Judicial Code of Conduct and the actual statutes governing military personnel before any similar situations arise in the future. Good day. With that, Blackstone returned to complete silence, the perfect example of Royal Guard discipline. Montgomery stood for a moment longer, deflated and diminished, before turning to retreat through the now dispersing crowd. Several tourists deliberately stepped aside, creating a path that felt more like a walk of shame than an escape route. Lieutenant Colonel Whitmore and Major Hargrove remained briefly, exchanging respectful nods before leaving. The incident was over as decisively as it had begun. Blackstone now stood exactly as he had before, the perfect image of ceremonial discipline, showing no sign of the legal brilliance that had so completely destroyed Montgomery's claims to authority. As normal activity returned around Buckingham Palace, tourists taking photos and life moving on, Blackstone remained at his post, his discipline unbroken. The only difference was the new respect in the eyes of those who approached, a quiet acknowledgement that behind the ceremonial uniform stood a man of exceptional quality, intelligent, brave, and firmly committed to both his military duties and the truth.